Hello everyone! If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe and one share.
The moment I felt excluded. Have you ever stood in a room full of people laughing and felt completely alone because you couldn't understand the joke? That was me. 3 years into my life in America. I was standing at a neighborhood party with a glass of lemonade in my hand and a fake smile plastered on my face while everyone around me laughed at something I had completely missed. I had been living in this country for 3 years. 3 years of English classes, 3 years of practicing my accent, 3 years of memorizing idioms and phrasal verbs that seemed to change every week. And still, I couldn't keep up. My neighbor Karen had invited me to her barbecue, and I had been so excited to finally feel like part of the community. But within minutes, I was lost. The conversation was fast, furious, and full of cultural references I didn't understand. Something about a football game. Something about a TV show from the 90s. Something about a politician I had never heard of. I smiled. I nodded. I laughed at the wrong moments. And then someone asked me a direct question, and my mind went completely blank. I opened my mouth, but the words wouldn't come. "I'm sorry," I said, my accent suddenly feeling thick and heavy. "Can you repeat that, please?" The woman smiled politely and repeated herself, slower this time, like I was a child. And I understood every word she said. That was the worst part. I understood the English. I just didn't understand the culture. She had asked me if I thought the new traffic laws were going to affect our neighborhood. A simple question. But I had no idea what she was talking about. I had been too busy trying to survive in this country to follow local politics. In that moment, I felt like I had been pretending to be part of a world that would never fully accept me. I gave a vague answer, excused myself to the bathroom, and sat on the cold tile floor, trying not to cry. I had been doing this for years. Showing up. Smiling. Nodding. Pretending I understood when I didn't. And every time, I left feeling more invisible than before. But then something happened that would change everything. As I walked back to the party, I saw a woman in the corner of the yard. She wasn't talking to anyone. She was signing. Her hands were moving in a beautiful, fluid dance, and the person she was signing to was nodding and smiling. Completely engaged in the silent conversation. They didn't need words. They didn't need the right accent or the perfect vocabulary. They just needed to show up. And I realized that for all my obsession with English, I had completely missed the point. Communication isn't about sounding like a native speaker. It's about being present. It's about being willing to meet someone where they are. And right then, I decided I was going to learn sign language. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to understand what real inclusion looked like. I had no idea that this decision would lead me to a deaf neighbor named Elena, a mother-in-law who surprised me, and a letter from Vietnam that would make me cry for days. The neighbor who saw me differently. I left that barbecue feeling smaller than I had in years, convinced that I would never truly belong in America. But the universe had other plans. The very next day, a moving truck pulled up next door. And I watched as a silver-haired woman directed the movers with graceful hand gestures that I immediately recognized. She was deaf. And she was about to become my teacher. Her name was Elena, and she introduced herself the only way she could, with a notebook and a warm, crinkly-eyed smile that made me feel like I had known her my whole life. She wrote, "Hello, I'm Elena. I'm deaf. I saw you at the party yesterday. You looked sad. Are you okay?" I stared at her words, my eyes filling with tears. This woman, this stranger who couldn't hear a single sound, had noticed me. She had seen my sadness from across the yard. She had paid attention in a way that no one else at that party had. And she had come to check on me. I took the pen and wrote back, "I'm okay. I just feel invisible sometimes. I don't always understand people. My English is not perfect." Elena read my words and laughed, a silent, shaking laugh that made her whole body move. Then she wrote, "Mia, I've been invisible my whole life. But I learned something. Being invisible has nothing to do with language. It has everything to do with whether people choose to see you." That sentence hit me like a thunderbolt. I had spent years blaming my accent, my grammar, my vocabulary for my loneliness. But Elena was telling me that the problem wasn't my English. The problem was that I had been surrounded by people who didn't bother to look. Over the next few weeks, Elena and I developed a beautiful routine. Every afternoon, we would sit in her backyard with a notebook and a cup of tea, and she would teach me sign language. Not just the signs, but something deeper. The philosophy behind them. When you sign, she wrote, you have to look at the person. You have to use your face. Your body. Your whole self. You can't sign while looking at your phone. You can't sign while walking away. You have to be present. That's what inclusion really means. It means being fully here for someone, no matter how they communicate. I thought about all the conversations I had been having for years. All the people who talked to me while looking at their phones. All the people who nodded politely but weren't really listening. All the people who made me feel like my broken English was a burden. And I realized that Elena was right. Inclusion isn't about making everyone speak the same language. It's about making everyone feel seen. Even if that means learning a new way to look. One afternoon, Elena taught me the sign for inclusion. She spread her hands wide, palms up, and brought them together like she was gathering something precious. It means bringing people in, she wrote. Not pushing them away. Not making them fit in. Just bringing them in. I signed it back to her, and I felt something shift in my chest. All those years of trying to fit in. All those years of apologizing for my accent. All those years of feeling like I was the problem. And now, this woman was showing me that the problem wasn't me. It was the world that didn't know how to include me. But Elena wasn't done teaching me. She had a bigger lesson waiting. And it started with an invitation to a dinner party. A dinner party where no one would speak. Where everyone would sign. Where I would be the only hearing person in a room full of deaf people. and I was terrified. The silent dinner party. I walked into Elena's house that evening with my heart pounding and my hands sweating, convinced that I was about to make a complete fool of myself. Her living room was filled with people, 8 of them, sitting in a circle, their hands moving in a beautiful, silent dance that I could barely follow. And I was the only hearing person in the room. The only one who had grown up with sound. The only one who had never had to rely on her eyes to understand. Elena greeted me at the door with a warm hug and signed, "Welcome. Everyone is excited to meet you." I signed back, "I'm nervous. My ASL is not good." And she signed, "Perfect is not the goal. Connection is." Those words stayed with me through the entire evening. I sat down in the circle, and one by one, Elena's friends introduced themselves. They signed their names. They signed, "Nice to meet you." They asked me questions about Vietnam, about my children, about how I had learned ASL. And I answered. Slowly. Awkwardly. With many mistakes and many pauses. But they didn't correct me. They didn't laugh at me. They just watched. They listened with their eyes. They waited. And when I finally finished a sentence, they would nod and smile and sign back. I felt something I had never felt before in America. I felt included. Not because I was speaking perfect sign language. Not because I was keeping up with the conversation. But because they were paying attention. They were seeing me. They were making space for me. At one point, James, the man who had welcomed me so warmly at the beginning, signed to me, "What is it like to hear?" I had never been asked that question before. I had never thought about it. I sat there, thinking, and I signed back, "It is loud. It is confusing. I miss things. I misunderstand. I pretend to understand. And sometimes, I wish I could turn it off." James laughed his silent laugh and signed back, "That is how I feel all the time. But I cannot turn it off. I just have to find people who see me." And in that moment, I realized that we were not so different. He couldn't hear. I couldn't speak perfectly. But we were both looking for the same thing. Connection. Belonging. Someone who would take the time to see us. The dinner lasted for hours. We signed about everything: food, family, travel, dreams. We laughed. We ate. We connected. And by the end of the night, I felt like I had found a community that I had been searching for my whole life. A community that didn't care about my accent. A community that didn't judge my mistakes. A community that was willing to slow down, to pay attention, to include me just as I was. As I walked home that night, I realized something profound. Inclusion wasn't about making everyone the same. It wasn't about forcing everyone to speak the same language. It was about creating space for difference. It was about being willing to learn someone else's language. And I had just learned the most important lesson of my life. But there was still one person who didn't understand this lesson. One person who was about to resist everything I had learned. My husband. And his resistance would test everything I believed about inclusion, love, and the meaning of family. My husband's resistance and surrender. My husband looked at me across the dinner table that night, his fork hovering mid-air, his expression a mixture of confusion and mild irritation. "Let me get this straight," he said slowly. "You want me to learn a language that has no words? A language that nobody in our family speaks? A language that I don't even need to talk to you?" I nodded, my heart sinking. "Yes. That's exactly what I want." He put down his fork and sighed. "Mia, I already know how to talk to you. I've been talking to you for 5 years. I understand your accent. I understand your broken English. I don't need sign language to love you." And there it was. The word I had been dreading. Need. He thought inclusion was about need. He thought learning ASL was a burden, a chore, something unnecessary. He didn't understand that inclusion wasn't about need. It was about want. It was about saying, "I want to understand you better. I want to enter your world. I want to meet you where you are." I tried to explain. I told him about Elena. About the silent dinner party. About the way I had felt seen for the first time in years. I told him that I wasn't asking him to learn sign language for me. I was asking him to learn it for himself. So he could experience what I had experienced. So he could understand what real inclusion felt like. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'll think about it." That was his way of saying no. I knew it. And I felt the familiar ache of rejection rising in my chest. The same ache I had felt at the barbecue. The same ache I had felt every time I had tried to connect and been dismissed. But I didn't give up. The next day, I took him to meet Elena. I watched as he stood in her living room, awkward and uncomfortable, not knowing what to do with his hands. I watched as Elena smiled at him with that same warm, crinkly-eyed smile she had given me. And I watched as she wrote in her notebook, "Don't worry. Everyone is a beginner. I was a beginner once too. And look at me now." My husband read her words, and something shifted in his face. He sat down. He picked up the pen. And he wrote back, "Teach me the alphabet." 3 weeks later, he came home from work with a surprise. He had been practicing in secret. He stood in front of me, his hands trembling, and signed, "I love you. I'm sorry. I was wrong." I cried. Right there in the kitchen. Because in that moment, I realized that inclusion wasn't just about being included. It was about being willing to include others. It was about being willing to change. My husband had been resistant. He had been stubborn. He had been afraid. But he had surrendered. And that surrender was the most beautiful gift he had ever given me. But the real test was still coming. Because his mother, Susan, had no idea what we were doing. And she was about to find out in the most unexpected way possible. Susan's first sign. The Thanksgiving dinner at my mother-in-law Susan's house was always loud. The kind of loud that made my ears ring and my head spin. The kind of loud that reminded me, every single year, that I was from a different world. But this year was different. This year, I had something to share. My husband and I had been practicing ASL for weeks, and we had made a pact. We were going to sign to each other at the dinner table. Not to exclude anyone, but to include ourselves. To remind each other that we had found a new way to connect. The moment we walked through the door, Susan pulled me into her usual crushing hug and said, "Mia, honey, you look so thin. Are you eating?" I smiled and said, "I'm fine, thank you." But then I looked at my husband and signed. She always says that. Every year. He signed back, "I know. She means well." And we both laughed. But Susan had seen us. She had watched our hands moving. She had noticed the secret language passing between us. And her face shifted from confusion to something else. Hurt. "What are you two doing?" she asked. "Are you talking about me?" I felt my stomach drop. I had been so excited to share my new skill that I hadn't considered how it might look to someone who couldn't understand. My husband quickly explained. "Mom, Mia's been learning sign language. Her neighbor Elena is deaf. We've been practicing together. It's nothing bad. I promise." Susan stared at us for a long moment. Then she did something I didn't expect. She sat down at the kitchen table, folded her hands, and said, "Teach me." I thought I had misheard her. "What?" she said. "Teach me one sign. Just one. I want to know what it feels like to talk to someone without using words." And so I taught her the sign for "I love you." The iconic ASL gesture. Thumb, index finger, and pinky extended. She practiced it over and over, her fingers stiff and awkward, her face concentrated. And when she finally got it right, she looked at me with tears in her eyes. "I love you, Mia," she said out loud. And then she signed it too. That moment changed everything. By the end of the dinner, 6 of my husband's relatives had learned the sign for "I love you." We passed it around the table like a secret code. We signed it across the turkey. We signed it across the mashed potatoes. We signed it across the pumpkin pie. And for the first time in 5 years, I didn't feel like the foreigner at the family table. I felt like I belonged. Because I had brought something to the table that no one else had. A different way of connecting. A different way of loving. And they had received it with open arms. But the biggest surprise came after dinner. My mother-in-law pulled me aside and said, "Mia, I want you to teach me more. I want to learn the whole language. I want to surprise Elena when I meet her." I was speechless. This woman who had always been loud and boisterous and full of noise wanted to learn silence. For me. For Elena. For the simple joy of connecting. And I realized that this was the true meaning of inclusion. It wasn't about making everyone the same. It was about being willing to learn someone else's language. Even if that language had no words at all. But I had no idea that the most powerful lesson about inclusion was still waiting for me. It came from my mother. In a letter. From Vietnam. And it was written in a language I had never seen before. The children's inclusive game. Children don't need lessons to understand inclusion. They just need a reason. My daughter Lily came home from school one afternoon with a secret she refused to share with anyone except me. She grabbed my hand, pulled me into her bedroom, closed the door, and then signed, "I learned something today." Not in ASL. In a language she had invented herself. A secret code of gestures that only she and I understood. Her reason was simple. Her best friend at school had a deaf grandmother who sometimes picked her up. And Lily wanted to be able to say hello to her. Without words. Without embarrassment. Without the awkwardness that adults feel when they don't know what to do. So she had created her own system. She pointed to her chest for me. She pointed to her friend for you. She waved her hand for hello. And she smiled for "I'm happy to see you." I watched her practice her secret language with her friend the next day at school pickup. The deaf grandmother arrived, and Lily walked up to her, pointed to herself, pointed to her friend, and then waved with the biggest smile on her face. The grandmother's face lit up. She waved back. She signed something I didn't understand. And Lily nodded as if she understood perfectly. That night, my husband and I sat on the couch watching our children play a new game. They had invented it themselves. It was called Silent Talk. The rules were simple. No speaking aloud. Only gestures. Only facial expressions. Only the language of the body. And the goal was to communicate something meaningful without making a single sound. My son, who was 8, tried to tell his sister that he wanted to go to the park. He pointed out the window. He made a walking motion with his fingers. He pointed at her and then at the door. And she nodded. She understood. My husband looked at me with wonder in his eyes. "They're doing it," he whispered. "They're actually communicating." And I realized that this was the gift that sign language had given our family. Not just a new skill. Not just a way to talk to Elena. But a new way of being together. A new way of paying attention. A new way of showing up for each other. The children's game became a daily ritual. They would sit at the dinner table and sign to each other across the plates of food. They would argue without words. They would make up without shouting. They would say "I love you" without saying anything at all. And I watched them, and I cried. Because I had spent so many years obsessing over my accent. Over my grammar. Over my mistakes. And my children had just solved the problem that had been haunting me my entire American life. They had discovered that communication isn't about perfection. It's about presence. It's about the willingness to try. Inclusion isn't something you learn from a textbook. It's something you practice. Every day. In every interaction. And my children were teaching me that the simplest gestures, a wave, a smile, a pointing finger, can be the most powerful tools of inclusion. But there was one more lesson waiting for me. One more gift that this journey would give our family. And it came from the most unexpected source of all. My mother-in-law called me the next week. She had been practicing her ASL. She wanted to meet Elena. She wanted to show her what she had learned. And she wanted me to translate. Not from Vietnamese to English, but from English to sign. And I realized that I had become a bridge. A bridge between two worlds. Between sound and silence. Between words and meaning. And I had never felt more included in my entire life. The day two worlds met. My mother-in-law Susan had been practicing her ASL for 3 weeks when she called me with the news that she was ready to meet Elena. She had learned the alphabet. She had learned basic greetings. She had learned how to say I'm happy to meet you. And she had learned the sign for friend because, as she put it, I want Elena to know that's what we are. I was nervous. I knew that this meeting meant something bigger than just two women saying hello. It meant that my new American family was embracing my new American community. It meant that the loud, boisterous, talkative world of my husband's childhood was finally meeting the silent, expressive, beautiful world I had discovered. We decided to host the meeting at my house. Elena arrived first, as she always did, with her notebook and her warm smile. She signed hello to me, and I signed back. She asked if I was nervous, and I signed yes. She laughed her silent laugh and signed me too. Then Susan arrived. She walked through the door with a bouquet of flowers and a determined expression on her face. She hugged me, kissed my cheek, and then turned to Elena. And I watched as two women who had never met before, who couldn't speak the same language, looked at each other across my living room. Susan walked up to Elena, held out her hand, and signed, "Hello. I'm Susan. I'm happy to meet you." Her signs were awkward. Her fingers were stiff. She made a mistake in the order of the words. But Elena understood. And Elena started to cry. She signed back, "Hello. I'm Elena. I'm happy to meet you too." And then she hugged my mother-in-law. Right there in my living room. Two women from completely different worlds, embracing each other through silence. I cried too. I couldn't help it. I had been so scared that this moment would be awkward. That Susan would feel foolish. That Elena would feel patronized. But what I witnessed was something else entirely. What I witnessed was pure human connection. Susan sat down next to Elena on the couch, and they began to communicate. Slowly. Awkwardly. With a lot of pointing and a lot of laughing. Susan would try to sign something. Elena would tilt her head in confusion. Susan would try again. Elena would nod and smile. They didn't need perfect grammar. They didn't need fluency. They needed patience. They needed presence. And they had it. I made tea and left them alone. I sat in the kitchen, listening to the sound of their silence, and I realized something profound. This was what inclusion really meant. Not just tolerating someone's differences. Not just being polite. But being willing to enter someone else's world. Being willing to learn their language. Being willing to show up, even when you feel foolish. After an hour, I walked back into the living room to find Susan and Elena giggling together. Susan was pointing at the flowers she had brought, signing something I didn't understand. And Elena was nodding, signing back, her face bright with joy. Susan turned to me, her eyes sparkling. "She told me I'm a good student," she said. "She said I should keep practicing." Then she looked at Elena and signed something that made Elena start crying all over again. I asked what she had signed. Susan said, "I told her that she is a gift to this world. And that I'm so glad my daughter-in-law found her." That night, after Susan left and Elena went home, I sat in my living room with my husband and my children. And I realized that inclusion had given me more than just a new way to communicate. It had given me a new family, a new community, and a new understanding of what it truly means to belong. But there was still one lesson left. One more gift that this journey had to offer. And it came from the most unexpected place of all. My own mother. In a letter. From Vietnam. The mistake that taught me humility. I had been feeling so proud of myself. My ASL was improving. My husband was learning. My mother-in-law was practicing. My children had invented their own silent language. I had built a community around inclusion. And then the universe decided to remind me that humility is the foundation of all real learning. It was a Saturday afternoon, and I had invited both Elena and Susan over for a casual brunch. I was so excited to show off my progress. I had prepared a story to tell them. A story about my children. How they had been so energetic lately, running around the house like little tornadoes. I had practiced the signs for energetic all week. I was ready. I started signing. My children are so. And then I made a mistake. A stupid mistake. Instead of signing energetic, I signed explosive. The signs were similar. My hands moved in almost the same way. But the meaning was completely different. I had just told Elena and Susan that my children were explosive. Literally. That they were about to blow up. Elena stared at me with wide eyes. Susan looked confused. And then, after a long moment of silence, Elena burst into laughter. Her silent, shaking laughter filled the room. She signed back, "Did you just say your children are explosive?" I felt my face turn red. The familiar heat of embarrassment crawled up my neck. All that confidence. All that pride. And in one moment, I had been reduced to the same insecure person I had been at the barbecue. The person who made mistakes. The person who was different. The person who didn't belong. But then Elena did something that changed everything. She reached across the table and took my hand. She signed, "This is how we learn. We make mistakes. We laugh. We try again. Don't be embarrassed. Be proud that you tried." And Susan nodded. She signed, "I made so many mistakes when I was learning. I still make mistakes. That's okay." And I realized that inclusion wasn't about being perfect. It wasn't about getting everything right. It was about being willing to try. Willing to be vulnerable. willing to make mistakes in front of people who would catch you when you fell. I looked at Elena and Susan. Two women who had come from completely different worlds. Two women who had been willing to learn each other's language. Two women who had made countless mistakes along the way. And they had never given up. They had never been embarrassed. They had never felt like they didn't belong. Because they knew that belonging wasn't about fitting in. It was about being seen. Even when you made mistakes. Even when you were imperfect. Even when you signed explosive instead of energetic. That afternoon, I learned something that I would carry with me forever. Inclusion isn't about being the same. It's about being willing to be different. Willing to make mistakes. Willing to be vulnerable. And being willing to laugh at yourself when you mess up. But the biggest lesson was still waiting for me. It came from a letter. From Vietnam. From my mother. And it would teach me that inclusion doesn't have borders. It doesn't have languages. It doesn't have distances. And it would arrive in the most unexpected way. My husband's silent confession. My husband stood in front of me with his hands slightly trembling, his eyes filled with an emotion I couldn't quite name. He had been practicing this moment for weeks, he told me later. Practicing in secret. Practicing while I was asleep. Practicing in the bathroom mirror like a nervous teenager before a first date. And now he was ready. He took a deep breath. And then his hands began to move. Mia, he signed slowly, deliberately, making sure every gesture was clear. I have something to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago. I felt my heart stop. What was he going to say? Was he leaving me? Was he unhappy? My mind raced through every possible scenario, each one worse than the last. But then he continued signing. When you came to America, I thought I was doing you a favor. I thought I was giving you a better life. But I didn't realize that I was asking you to leave everything behind. Your language. Your culture. Your family. Your identity. And I never thanked you for that sacrifice. I never told you how brave I thought you were. I started crying. Silent tears streaming down my face. I watched you struggle, he signed, his hands moving faster now, more urgent. I watched you cry in the bathroom. I watched you smile and nod when you didn't understand. I watched you hide your accent like it was something to be ashamed of. And I never said anything. I never told you that your accent was beautiful. I never told you that your broken English was brave. I never told you that the sound of your voice, even when you made mistakes, was the sound of home to me. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, watching my husband's hands say the words he had never been able to say out loud. But then you started learning sign language, he continued. And I watched you become someone new. Someone confident. Someone free. I watched you connect with Elena in a way I had never seen you connect with anyone. I watched you teach our children to communicate without words. I watched you teach my mother to sign. And I realized that you had found something that I had been missing my whole life. You had found a way to listen. Really listen. Not with your ears. With your whole being. He paused, his hands hovering in the air. And I want to learn to listen like that too. I want to hear you with my eyes. I want to understand you with my heart. I want to be the kind of husband who doesn't just hear your words, but who sees your soul. And then he signed the most beautiful sentence I have ever seen. I love you, Mia. Not because you speak perfect English, but because you taught me how to include you, how to see you, how to truly belong to you. I fell into his arms, sobbing. All those years of feeling invisible. All those years of feeling like I wasn't good enough. All those years of hiding my accent, my mistakes, my fear. And he had seen me all along. That night, we sat on the couch together, signing to each other long into the night. We talked about everything. Our fears. Our hopes. Our dreams for the future. We talked in a language that had no accent. No grammar mistakes. No fear. Just connection. And I realized that this was the true power of inclusion. Not just as a tool for communication, but as a bridge between two souls who wanted to belong to each other. But there was one more gift waiting for me. One more lesson that would complete this incredible journey. It came from the most unexpected place. A letter. From my mother in Vietnam. And it would prove that inclusion has no borders. The letter that proved inclusion matters. The envelope arrived on a Thursday afternoon, a simple white rectangle with my mother's handwriting on the front. And I knew immediately that something was different. My mother never wrote letters. She called. She video chatted. She sent voice messages. But she never wrote. I opened the envelope with trembling hands, and inside was a single sheet of paper. But it wasn't written in Vietnamese. It wasn't written in English. It was written in something else entirely. At the top of the page, in her careful, elegant handwriting, my mother had written, "Dear Mia, I asked Elena to teach me, so I could tell you something I never had the words for." And then, below that, she had drawn a series of pictures. Simple stick figures. Hands pointing. Hearts. Smiling faces. She had created her own sign language. Her own way of communicating with me across the thousands of miles that separated us. I studied the drawings, trying to understand what she was trying to say. A figure pointing to herself. A figure pointing to a heart. A figure pointing to a house. A figure crying. A figure smiling. And then, at the bottom of the page, the word proud written in capital letters. My mother was telling me that she had learned to sign. Not the formal ASL that Elena had taught me, but her own version. Her own way of saying, "I see you. I love you. I understand. I am proud of you." I called her immediately, sobbing into the phone. "Mom, how did you do this?" She laughed, that warm familiar laugh that had been the soundtrack of my childhood. Elena sent me videos. We video chatted every night for 3 weeks. She taught me the basics. And then I made up the rest. I couldn't speak. I couldn't breathe. My mother, who had never left Vietnam, who didn't speak English, had learned a new language just to connect with me. Not because she had to, but because she wanted to. Because she loved me. "Mom," I whispered, "why didn't you just write in Vietnamese?" And she said something that shattered every misconception I had ever had about inclusion. "Because I wanted to learn your language, Mia. Not the language you speak. The language you love. I wanted to understand the world that you had found in America. The world of silence and connection. The world of Elena and Susan and your children. I wanted to be part of that world. Even if I couldn't hear it." I sat on my kitchen floor, surrounded by my family, holding that letter in my hands, and I realized that this was the true meaning of inclusion. It wasn't about making everyone the same. It wasn't about forcing everyone to speak the same language. It was about being willing to meet someone where they are. To learn their language. To enter their world. To say, "You matter to me. And I will do whatever it takes to include you." My mother had done that. Elena had done that. Susan had done that. My husband had done that. My children had done that. And now, finally, I was doing it for myself. I was learning to include myself. To accept myself. To believe that I belonged. I looked at the letter one more time. At those simple stick figures. At that heart. At that word proud. And I realized that this was the answer to the question that had haunted me since that barbecue. Does inclusion matter? Yes. More than anything. Because inclusion is love. It's the willingness to see someone, to hear someone, to make space for someone, even when they are different. Even when they make mistakes. Even when they sign explosive instead of energetic. So if you're watching this, if you've ever felt like you don't belong, let me tell you the truth. You do. You belong. Not because you're perfect. Not because you speak perfectly. But because you're willing to try. And that's all any of us can do. That's all any of us need. Just keep trying. Keep showing up. Keep including. Because inclusion matters. And so do you.